Jehovah's Witnesses and the United Nations. How the Watchtower Society Fooled Millions. Chapter 7, entitled NGO Criteria. So did the Watchtower actually do something wrong by registering as an NGO in association with the United Nations Department of Public Information in 1991 and by exercising their privileges to participate as such NGO? Well, we're going to let Watchtower answer their own questions. Here are a couple of articles to take a look at. So this article is taken from December 8th, 1990, page 20, and it comes from an article entitled Human Rule Reaches Its Climax. Now here in the black it says, now during the 20th century, the climax of human rule has been reached. Human governments have schemed to form the most brazen and defiant conspiracy against divine rule that has ever existed. They have done so not once but twice, creating first the League of Nations and then the United Nations. Revelation chapter 13 verses 14 and 15 calls the result the image of the wild beast. That is fitting because it is an image of the entire human political system of things on earth. Like a wild beast, elements of this political system have preyed upon earth's inhabitants and caused untold misery. The League ended in disaster in 1939. The same fate awaits the United Nations in fulfillment of God's prophecy. Gird yourselves and be shattered to pieces. Gird yourselves and be shattered to pieces. Plan out a scheme and it will be broken up. Isaiah chapter 8 verse 9 and 10. This article is taken from the September 1st, 1987 Watchtower from an article entitled On Guard Against Peace and Security as Devised by Nations. And notice what it says here in the black. The United Nations may boast of 159 members today, embracing virtually all nations. No doubt, in due time, the United Nations will be at the forefront with regard to the coming proclamation of peace and security. Sad to say, that world organization is throwing the billions of mankind off guard. Why so? Because such peace, even though backed by all the religious organizations of this world, including those of Christendom, does not mean peace with the Creator of the universe, who has the power to give life and to take it away according to his determination of vital matters in the heavens and on the earth. In the prophecy of Isaiah, the Creator explicitly says, "The heavens are my throne and the earth is my footstool." Isaiah chapter 66 verse 1. The nations down here on his footstool are not adorning it by their United Nations organization. They are striving politically to maintain global peace and security and thereby keep the United Nations in existence. Jehovah's dedicated witnesses on earth cannot join with the world in depending on the man-made measures that are being taken for the peace and security of worldly nations. They are to take to heart the words of James chapter 4 verse 4. Adulteresses, do you not know that the friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world is constituting himself an enemy of God. Though not actively opposing the peace and security devised by nations, Jehovah's Witnesses cannot recommend it to the millions of people who are seeking a place of safety when the world's greatest trouble erupts and puts an end to this system of things. For it is God's new system of things that will bring in worldwide security under the Prince of Peace, Jesus Christ. So these are only two articles. There are many, many more that you can type in under your Watchtower Library CD Just type in United Nations in parentheses, and you can come up with a score of other ones that denounce religions for being a part of the United Nations. So you be the judge on what the Watchtower Society thinks of the United Nations. So although Watchtower Society tried to say that there was an unknown change in unacceptable criteria for NGOs after they had already joined, the facts show that this unacceptable criteria had been in place since 1968 in a document known as Resolution 1296, well before the Watchtower applied. So what is this resolution? I'm going to provide a link down in the box where you can take a look at this resolution for yourself. It's quite lengthy, so I'm not going to read it. But some apologists may object to this resolution, stating that the Watchtower joined as a DPI, not an ECOSOC. So the criteria didn't apply to them as part of the DPI. Well, just a few days later, Resolution 1297 required NGOs associated with the Department of Public Information to bear in mind the letter and spirit of the Resolution 1296. So clearly the NGOs in association with the DPI were required to adhere to the criteria in Resolution 1296 all the way dating back to 1968. And I'll post a link to Resolution 1297 as well. So we have to see that no matter what departments or which branch of the UN these NGOs are associated with, they still have to adhere to the Charter of the United Nations. And I'm going to post a link to the Charter of the UN. That also is quite lengthy. So in a nutshell, the Charter of the UN, the principles and purposes of the UN, is to establish global peace through human measures, and to establish that peace even if it means removal of threats, suppression of acts of aggression, and give the United Nations every assistance in any action it takes. Those phrases were taken from the UN Charter. So of course, taking those kind of measures to achieve peace would lead to scuffles, fights, even military action. So is this kind of support in direct opposition to the Watchtower's teachings on strict political neutrality? Well, let's take a look at several articles and see what the Watchtower has to say about this. Here we have an article from the August 1st, 1999 Watchtower. Gladly Accepting Jehovah's Direction is the name of the article, and please follow along in the black. It says, one man whose office I went strongly criticized us because we do not salute the flag or go to war. After he had ranted about that for some time, I finally said, I want you to know, and you do know, that Jehovah's Witnesses are not involved in a war with anybody in the world. We are not involved in the affairs of the world. We are not involved in their wars, their politics. We are totally neutral. Another article taken from the November 1st, 1997 Watchtower, from the article In the World But No Part of It. Follow along in the black. It says, for nearly 2,000 years, Christians have prayed, let your kingdom come, let your will take place, as in heaven, also upon earth. Matthew chapter 6, verse 10. Jehovah's Witnesses know that God's kingdom alone can bring real peace on earth. Being close observers of Bible prophecy, They are convinced that this prayer will soon be answered and that the kingdom will shortly take charge of earth affairs. Daniel chapter 2 verse 44. Their adherence to this kingdom makes them neutral in the affairs of the governments of the world. Some nations claim to observe religious principles. Still, in practice, they ignore the fact that Jehovah is the universal sovereign and that he has enthroned Jesus as heavenly king with authority over the earth. Daniel chapter 4 verse 17, Revelation chapter 11 verse 15. A prophetic psalm states, "The kings of the earth take their stand, and high officials themselves have massed together as one against Jehovah and against his anointed one, Jesus, saying, Let us tear their bands apart and cast their cords away from us." Psalm 2 verse 2 and 3. Governments accept no divine bands or cords that would limit their exercise of national sovereignty. Hence, Jehovah says to Jesus, his chosen king, "Ask of me that I may give nations as your inheritance and the ends of the earth as your own possession. You will break them with an iron scepter, as though a potter's vessel you will dash them to pieces." Another article is taken from the April 15, 1996 Watchtower under the subject, "Why Worldly Religion Will End," and follow along in the black highlight. It says, more than 50 years ago, in the booklet entitled "Religion Reaps the Whirlwind," Jehovah's Witnesses exposed Christendom's involvement with politics. What was said then applies with equal force today. Honest investigation of the conduct of the religious clergy of all denominations will reveal that the religious leaders of all Christendom are participating with keen interest in the politics of this present evil world and are dabbling in its mundane affairs. Back then, the witnesses castigated Pope Pius XII for his concordance with Nazi Hitler in 1933 and Fascist Franco in 1941, as well as the Pope's exchange of diplomatic representatives with the aggressor nation, Japan, in March of 1942, just a few months after the infamous Pearl Harbor attack. The Pope failed to heed James' warning. "Adulteresses, do you not know that the friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world is constituting himself an enemy of God." James chapter 4 verse 4. What is the situation today? The papacy is still involved in politics, both through its clergy and through its laity representatives. Recent popes have put out their stamp of approval on the United Nations by addressing that man-made counterfeit for world peace. In a recent issue of L'Osservatore Romano, the official Vatican newspaper announced that 7 new diplomats, ambassadors to the Holy See, presented their credentials to the Holy Father. Could we imagine Jesus and Peter being involved in such diplomatic exchanges? Jesus refused to be made king by the Jews and said that his kingdom was not part of this world. John chapter 6 verse 15 and John chapter 18 verse 36. Another article taken from the April 15th, 1996 Watchtower from the article, "Why Worldly Religion Will End." Follow along in the black highlight. As religion reaps the whirlwind, asked in 1994, so do we now. Can any organization that enters into treaties with worldly powers and actively wiggles itself into the political affairs of this world, seeking advantage in and protection from this world, be God's church or represent Jesus Christ on earth? Manifestly, all religionists who make common cause with the kingdoms of this world cannot represent the kingdom of God by Jesus Christ. Another article taken from the April 15th, 1996 Watchtower, from the article Why True Worship Receives God Blessing. Follow along in the black highlight. A sixth requisite for worship acceptable to God is that of neutrality regarding the political affairs of this world. Why should Christians remain neutral in politics? Paul, James, and John gives us solid reason for that stance. The Apostle Paul wrote that Satan is the god of this system of things, who is blinding the minds of the unbelievers by every means possible, including divisive politics. The disciple James stated that friendship with the world is enmity with God, and the Apostle John said that the whole world is lying in the power of the wicked one. A true Christian, therefore, cannot compromise his devotion to God by being involved in Satan's corrupt world of politics and power. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4, James chapter 4, verse 4, and 1 John chapter 5, verse 19. And lastly, this article comes from the brochure, What Does God Require of Us?, printed in 1996. I believe this is on page 9. And if you notice up there in the upper right corner, after the scripture at Acts chapter 10, verse 34 and 35, it says this: Other people look to political organizations to solve man's problems. By doing this, they are rejecting God's kingdom. It is the only solution for our problems. Daniel chapter 2, verse 44. So there we have a small sample of articles published by the Watchtower Society condemning any kind of relationship with politics. Jehovah's Witnesses are to remain strictly neutral regarding politics. So not only was Watchtower Society required to support the Charter of the UN, they were also required to disseminate information in support of the UN, as stated in the resolutions 1296 and 1297. And since these were drafted in 1968, the Watchtower Society had indeed signed up under these requirements when they began their association in 1999. So they were well already in place before the Watchtower Society claims that they knew nothing of these changes. So that would mean agreeing to disseminate information regarding the United Nations programs would put them in opposition to their own doctrine. Go figure. Now, I'm going to provide a link to probably one of the most popular Watchtower Society apologists on this subject. And they try and say that these requirements became unacceptable in 1996, 4 years after the Watchtower Society was already accepted as an NGO. So they can't be faulted for this. And they base this on a UN document called Resolution 1996/31. It's lengthy. I'm not going to post that here, but I'll post this Watchtower Apologist webpage, which has links to that as well. That way you can get both sides of the story. I'm not just going to post something negative. I'll post the other side of that as well. There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem lies that this resolution 1996/31 basically states many of the same requirements that were in the resolution 1296 written in 1968. And so again, I'll have links to these resolutions and so on and so forth. So these apologists see the unacceptable requirements here and think that this resolution 1996 was the origination of these unacceptable terms. They don't realize that it's just a recap, basically, of the requirements that were in place since 1968. So this is going to conclude this chapter. Stay tuned for the next one. Thank you for taking time to listen to my summary of Jehovah's Witnesses and the United Nations. How the Watchtower Society fooled millions. Post your comments, like and share this video, subscribe to my channel, and stay tuned for Chapter 8.